Karen Wycombe thought she was clever when she invited 500 strangers to camp under the stars on land she didn't own. She charged every one of them $50, like she was running a desert music festival instead of trespassing on another man's property. She believed her HOA title made her queen of the valley, and she strutted around like the dust under her expensive shoes belonged to her by birthright. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't have imagined even in her wildest influencer-polished dreams, was that I had 40,000 tiny guardians living just a few yards from where she set up her pastel yoga tents. And those guardians, those bees, don't take kindly to screaming crowds, thumping bass speakers, and entitled outsiders stumping around their home. By the time the ambulances finished hauling away the last of Karen's mindfulness campers, even she understood there's a difference between public land and private property, and an even bigger difference between bullying a retiree and provoking someone with nothing left to lose. I'm Samuel Rourke. I spent 28 years running toward flames while everyone else ran away. I pulled families out of collapsed trailers, held the hands of men taking their last breaths, and memorized the sound of roofs cracking right before they fell. I know danger. I know courage, and I damn sure know how to protect what's mine. But before I tell you how a swarm of bees taught Karen Wycombe and her followers a lesson they'll never forget, let me take you back to how this whole storm started. Because it didn't begin with bees, or camping festivals, or sheriff's deputies blocking the road as panicked yoga enthusiasts fled my pasture. No, it started long before that, back when I was just a grieving widower trying to keep busy and stay sane. And it started the day Alyssa Karen Wycombe marched down my driveway with a clipboard, an Instagram smile, and the belief she could reshape an entire neighborhood simply by declaring it so. The first time I saw Alyssa Karen Wycombe, she was circling the neighborhood like a hawk that had mistaken itself for a songbird. She was new back then, fresh from some high-end suburb near San Jose, and she drove one of those glossy electric SUVs that looked like they were born in a lab. She and her husband, Thomas, had bought the most expensive house in the newest development. 5 bedrooms, 3 garages, artificial stone imported from Italy, and a backyard that needed 2 groundskeepers to keep alive. I remember thinking she didn't look like someone who'd ever fixed a fence or knelt in the dirt. She looked like someone who had opinions about people mealing in dirt. Meanwhile, I had lived on my 15 acres outside Millersford, California, my entire life. My grandfather bought this land in 1951, back when the county was more cows than commuters. I grew up learning to identify trouble by smell alone. Electrical burning, propane leaks, chemical smoke, and after almost 30 years as a firefighter, a part of me was wired to be alert even when I didn't want to be. 2 years before Karen arrived, my wife, Linda, died. 40 years together, then gone in what felt like a blink. Before her diagnosis, we talked about traveling, gardening, watching our grandchildren grow. After she passed, the only sound in the house at night was the refrigerator humming and my thoughts pacing like restless animals. I retired because I couldn't keep running into fires knowing I had no one waiting at home. So I picked up beekeeping, something Linda had always wanted us to try together. She used to say, "It'll keep you calm." She loved the idea of nurturing creatures that contributed something sweet to the world. I didn't know then how important those bees would become, not just as a hobby, but as a lifeline. Each hive gave me a purpose. Each colony buzzed with a sense of order I desperately needed. I named every one of my hives after someone I'd served with: Martinez, Holloway, Parker, Silva, and O'Brien. Men and women who'd run into burning buildings with me. Heroes who deserved to be remembered. I tended those boxes with the same respect I gave the brothers and sisters I'd lost. My days were simple: coffee on the porch, a slow walk along the hives, checking frames, listening to the hum of healthy colonies, evenings spent bottling honey, reading old letters from Linda, or sitting quietly under the oak canopy she loved. Then Karen moved in. The first week she waved politely from her driveway, as if testing the friendliness level of the neighborhood. The second week she hosted a community brunch that involved catered fruit platters, a Bluetooth speaker playing soft piano covers of pop songs, and a sign-up sheet for an HOA she intended to create out of thin air. The third week she got herself elected president of that HOA with a turnout of 11 people, most of whom thought they were signing up for a neighborhood newsletter. By the fourth week, she was knocking on my door. I was sitting in my workshop, cleaning frames, when I heard footsteps in the gravel. Sharp, deliberate, not the steps of anyone familiar. When I opened the door, there she was, Alyssa Karen Wycombe in white sneakers, expensive workout leggings, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Rourke," she asked, tilting her head like she was unsure whether I qualified as fully human or part of the landscape. I'm the new HOA president. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss some concerns regarding your operations. Operations? I repeated. Yes, she said brightly. Your bees. I blinked at her. My bees. She took a breath like she was about to deliver a keynote speech. Some of the neighbors feel that large numbers of aggressive insects pose a safety hazard, especially to children, and they've expressed that the presence of livestock, she glanced at a hive box, or whatever these technically are, decreases property values. She pulled out a laminated sheet as if she'd rehearsed the moment. The HOA is committed to upholding community standards, so we'll need to have you relocate or remove your bees. I gave her a slow look. Ma'am, this land isn't part of your HOA. Her smile tightened, like plastic warps under too much heat. Everything in the Meadow Ridge Community Zone is included. My land was carved out 70 years before Meadow Ridge existed. It's not under your jurisdiction. She blinked, recalculating. Well, perhaps legally not, but your hives still affect the community. I'll need to file a formal notice. That was the first warning shot. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived accusing me of running a commercial hazard, threatening daily fines, and claiming my bees were unregistered dangerous livestock. I laughed at the phrase long enough that I almost choked on my coffee, but underneath the amusement was something sharper, colder. I'd faced burning floors, collapsing structures, screaming victims, but something about Karen's polished hostility triggered a familiar instinct, the instinct that says, this isn't someone who stops when you say no. They escalate, they double down, they dig deeper. I called my friend Ray Booker, who lived just down the road. Ray lived through enough HOA battles in the 90s to have a full collection of horror stories. He came over, looked at the letter, and snorted. She's bluffing, he said. She's a bully in yoga pants. Ignore her. But ignoring Karen was like ignoring termites. They don't go away just because you pretend they're not chewing through your walls. The escalation began subtly. First came the complaints. One neighbor suddenly discovered a bee near her mailbox. Another claimed a swarm was following her car when she drove past my property. They were dead leaves stuck to her bumper. Karen encouraged every complaint, documenting each one as if preparing a dissertation on bee terrorization. Then came the meeting. I walked into the Millersford Community Hall, a room full of metal folding chairs and the scent of stale coffee, and found nearly 30 people gathered. Karen stood at the front with a projector, the county animal control officer sitting beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She started a slideshow titled Threats to Community Safety. The first slide displayed a photo of a child with severe stings. The next one showed a hospital bed. None of them had anything to do with my bees. But Karen spoke with unwavering confidence, the kind that convinced people who didn't know better. For the sake of our families, we must take action. She finally stopped talking, and the room was quiet except for someone slurping the dregs of a coffee cup. I stood and walked slowly to the front. Everything she said is exaggerated or false, I began, placing my binder on the table. Here are my certifications. Here is proof of registration. Here's a documentation from the Agricultural Commissioner. Here's a letter from my neighbor, Noah Booker, confirming the bees actually improve local gardens. I handed the animal control officer my paperwork. He flipped through it with widening eyes. This all looks legal, he admitted. Very organized, too. Karen's smile wavered. But he has aggressive African I keep Italian honeybees, I interrupted, my voice steady, gentle, calm, bred for temperament. If they're agitated, it's because someone is bothering them. Neighbors murmured. Officer Ventura closed the folder and stood. Mrs. Wycombe, your complaint doesn't match the facts. Filing inaccurate species claims can be considered misuse of county resources. Her face flushed the color of a beet. This isn't over, she hissed at me as the meeting ended. But she was wrong. It wasn't over. It was only the opening act. Because if there was one thing I learned from years in rescue work, it's that some people don't stop when they're proven wrong. They escalate. The morning after that disastrous community meeting, I woke up before sunrise to the sound of my bees humming through the cool air. Normally, that sound calmed me. It felt like breathing alongside something ancient and steady. But that morning, there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. Something was wrong. Something had shifted. I stepped outside barefoot, my coffee warming my hands as a thin fog settled over the pasture. The grass was damp and glistening like silver thread. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. But the peace wasn't real. It was the quiet before a wave hits. Curran had left that meeting embarrassed, humiliated in front of a room full of neighbors she desperately needed to rule. People like her didn't lick their wounds quietly. They regrouped, they strategized, they attacked from a new angle. And she proved that just 2 days later. I was checking the moisture levels in my O'Brien hive when I heard voices, soft at first, then louder, talking, laughing, giving directions. I looked up toward the back half of my property and saw movement where there shouldn't have been any. 15 or so people were walking in pairs, dressed like they'd just stepped out of a catalog. Designer athletic outfits, designer water bottles, color-coordinated yoga mats. They were walking across my pasture like it was a public trail. I squinted. Oh, hell no. I grabbed my binoculars from the porch. The group wasn't just strolling, they were arranging themselves, taking photos, laying out mats right beside an old oak tree I used to climb as a kid. One of them dipped a toe into the pond. Another pointed at my bees like she was examining an exhibit at a zoo. Then I saw her. Standing in the center like she was leading a pilgrimage was none other than Alyssa Curran Wycombe. Her ponytail was perfect, her posture was perfect, her smile was perfect. Everything else about the situation was breathtakingly wrong. I walked toward them with long, angry strides. The grass swished around my boots. As soon as I got close enough for her to see me, Curran waved as if she were welcoming me to my own property. "Good morning, Sam," she called, cheerful and oblivious. "We're just conducting a wellness walk." I stared at her. "On my land?" She nodded like it was obvious. "Yes, these trails have been used by the community for decades, right?" She gestured grandly around her. "These historic farm paths have always been accessible." "There are no historic farm paths," I said flatly. "There is no public access. This is private property. You're trespassing." Her smile never broke. That was the thing about Curran. Her mask stayed glued on, even when the foundation underneath cracked. "Public access can be interpreted differently depending on community need," she said sweetly. I blinked. "No, it can't." "Well, we'll have to agree to disagree." I had to swallow hard to keep my temper from exploding. "You have 10 seconds to gather your people and get off my land." One of her followers, a middle-aged man with 2 white teeth, stepped forward. "Whoa, buddy, no need to be aggressive." I took one step closer. "You're all trespassing. Leave now." Curran clapped her hands like she was ending a toddler tantrum. "All right, everyone, let's continue toward the West Trail. The views are spectacular." She turned and started walking deeper into my property. I'm not sure what kept me from yelling. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the sudden sharp realization that this wasn't some misunderstanding. She was doing this on purpose. She was pushing. She was testing boundaries. And she wouldn't stop unless someone made her. They finally left after 20 minutes of wandering and snapping scenic photos like my land was a national park. When the last of them disappeared through the meadow, I pulled out my phone and called my friend Noah Booker. "She's trespassing?" he said after I explained. "Not just trespassing, she's leading guided tours." Noah whistled. "That woman's got nerve." "That's not all," I said. "She's telling people there's public access. There isn't, never has been." "You should talk to my dad, Ray. He knows more about land disputes than anyone." He wasn't wrong. Ray had fought 3 HOAs and won all 3. The man practically ate property law for breakfast. I drove to Ray's place that afternoon. He listened to me recount everything, his arms crossed, his face tight with disbelief. "Curran's not stupid," Ray said. "If she's claiming public access, she's setting something up." "What kind of something?" I asked. He thumbed the brim of his hat. "Something about establishing use patterns. You know what adverse possession is." I nodded. "Squatter laws." "Right, but it's not just squatters. It's continuous use, hostile use, open use. She's laying groundwork for a claim. Maybe not immediately, but she's planting seeds." My jaw tightened. "On my land?" Ray nodded slowly. "She wants something, and she's the kind of person that turns wants into war." I drove home with a lead weight sitting in my gut. I'd been a firefighter long enough to know the signs of a situation spiraling out of control. The small stuff always escalates. A forgotten candle becomes a house fire, a flicker of smoke becomes a wall of flame, and a petty complaint becomes a full-fledged attack. I didn't have to wait long to see just how far Curran would escalate. The next morning, I installed trail cameras along the property line. I posted bright yellow "No Trespassing" signs every 50 feet. I placed stakes along the fence line so no one could pretend they weren't sure where the boundary was. But none of that stopped her. For the next week, her wellness group showed up every morning at 9. Sometimes there were 10 people, sometimes 20. Once, nearly 30 women in matching pale blue athletic suits arrived with smoothie bottles and a playlist of spiritual flutes echoing through the meadow. Every day, Curran pretended the land was already hers. Every day she acted like she was the steward of my pastures. And every day I built more evidence. I caught dozens of photos on my trail cameras. Curran pointing, Curran lecturing, people sitting on my rocks, people entering areas I'd clearly marked as off-limits, Curran leading them like she was the keeper of the land's sacred energy. Then came Thomas. The man had barely said a word to me since moving in. He always looked like he had 3 meetings running simultaneously in his head. But 2 weeks after the trespassing started, he appeared with a set of surveying equipment that cost more than my truck. I spotted him from my porch. A tripod, a laser level, GPS markers, precision devices only surveyors or developers used, certainly not hobbyists. I walked out to him as he hammered a bright orange stake into the ground. "You mind telling me what you're doing?" I asked. He barely glanced up from his device. "Checking property lines. On someone else's property." He paused just long enough to appear annoyed at being interrupted. "There's confusion about where boundaries fall." "No, there isn't." He returned to his equipment, ignoring me like I was background noise. The arrogance rolled off him like heat from a diesel engine. I took out my phone and photographed everything. His markers, his equipment, the hole he dug through my soil. He eventually left without acknowledging me, but by then I knew this wasn't just about bees anymore. When people start surveying someone else's property without permission, they're not curious, they're planning. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table flipping through documents my grandfather had kept in a dusty metal box for decades. His original deed was there, perfectly preserved, the paper thick and yellowed slightly with age. I looked for easements, shared access rights, anything Curran could twist. There were none. Not a single one. Which meant everything she was doing was part of a buildup, an artificial narrative she was creating to justify a claim later. The next day, I went to the county records office and spent 6 hours digging through old maps, scanned documents, and legal descriptions so dense they looked like another language. But at the end of the day, I walked out with a binder full of proof. My land was as private as it gets. No one had the right to set foot on it without permission. But that wasn't the shocking discovery. That came later. It was a Saturday afternoon, humid and buzzing with insects. I was mowing near the west edge of the pasture when I noticed something strange, disturbed dirt near the fence line. The soil was wet where it shouldn't have been. There was a faint chemical smell too, one I'd learned to recognize during my firefighting days. It wasn't gasoline, it wasn't fertilizer, it was sewage. I frowned, cut the mower engine and walked toward the soft earth. I dug into the soil with my boot heel, and water seeped upward, brownish and unpleasant. I followed the damp trail along the fence until it crossed the property line, right into their backyard. A sinking dread filled my chest. Their septic line had ruptured. But it wasn't just leaking, it was draining downhill, directly onto my land. And based on how saturated the ground was, it had been happening for months, maybe longer. The next person I called was Noah. "No way," he said when I told him. "They'd know if their system was failing." "Not if it wasn't failing," I replied. "Not if it was installed wrong." He exhaled sharply. "I'll come look." Noah arrived in 20 minutes with soil testing kits and an expression that told me he already suspected the worst. The morning after discovering the septic contamination, I barely slept. I lay awake on the old couch in the living room staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of my bees drifting through the window screen. My mind kept replaying the image of muddy, contaminated soil soaking into my property. It kept replaying Karen's smug smile as she led trespassers across my land. And then it replayed Thomas, hammering survey stakes like he was preparing for construction. It felt like my land was being invaded from all directions. I sat up long before the sun rose. The sky outside was a charcoal shade of blue, the kind that presses down on you before dawn breaks. I made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, grabbed the binder of documents from the table, and started assembling a timeline. Trespassing dates, photos, septic evidence, Karen's false claims, Thomas's surveying. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. Around 9 a.m., I called the county environmental office. A woman answered, cheerful at first, though her tone faded the moment I mentioned waste contamination. By noon, an inspector named Harris was scheduled to come out the following morning. I almost felt relief. Almost. But the relief ended the moment Ray called. "You need to come over," he said. His voice was tight, urgent. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my truck keys and drove to the Booker property. Ray was waiting for me on his porch with a laptop open, his glasses pushed halfway down his nose. He looked like someone had just told him the house was on fire. "You need to see this," he said. Noah was standing behind him with arms crossed, lips tight. When Ray turned the laptop toward me, I felt my stomach drop. It was a social media post from Karen. She had launched something called the Millersford Community Safety and Wellness Group. The page was filled with staged photos, families walking in fields, generic stock images of smiling hikers, hands reaching toward the sky. But the real trouble was in her description. We are reclaiming the natural spaces in our neighborhood that have been obstructed by hazardous, unmanaged activities. It's time to restore our community's health and harmony. Below that was a pinned post. For decades, historic farm access routes have belonged to all of us. We are revitalizing these communal spaces. Join us in our weekly wellness walks on shared land. Shared land. Historic access. Restore community spaces. It was all crap. But to someone who didn't know better, it sounded legitimate. And the worst part? A map was attached. A map that highlighted my land as community accessible green space. My hands tightened around the laptop. What the hell is she doing? I muttered. Ray leaned back in his chair. Exactly what I warned you about. She's building a narrative. No one nodded. If enough people believe it, she can attempt a legal claim, especially if she stages enough events. I stared at the screen, feeling something hot and dark crawl into my chest. She's using the internet to rewrite reality. Ray scoffed. That's how these HOA dictatorships grow. Perception becomes truth if you shout loud enough. She can shout all she wants, I said. The law is the law. Ray gave me a look. The law matters, but public opinion, that's what she's harnessing. I slammed the laptop shut. Let her try. I'll bury her with evidence. But as I was driving home, I noticed something that made every muscle in my body tense. 3 SUVs were parked near the entrance of my property, and a dozen people, maybe more, were taking photos of my hives from the road. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and called out, "Can I help you?" A woman stepped forward, her expression polite but condescending. "We're documenting safety hazards for the community board." "Safety hazards?" I repeated. "Those are registered beehives. They're very close to the public access zone." I said, "There is no public access." "We already discussed this at the meeting. The area's been shared for years." My patience snapped like a dry twig. "Name one person who walked this land before the Wycombes moved in. Name one." Silence. But the cameras kept clicking. Karen had unleashed an army, and they were doing exactly what she wanted, building artificial evidence of shared use. I got out of the truck and planted myself between them and my property. "Take your photos somewhere else," I said firmly. "This is private land. Final warning." They hesitated. A few of them exchanged looks. Then the woman sighed dramatically. "Fine, but the HOA will handle this." "There is no HOA on my property." She gave me a pitying smile, like I was too stupid to understand my own deed, then got in her SUV and left. My whole body buzzed with frustration and dread. This wasn't just harassment, it was mobilization. Karen wasn't working alone anymore. She had followers, foot soldiers, disciples, and she was preparing them for something big. That night I called Deputy Ruiz. She knew my family. I'd known her since she was 12. Her father and I fought a barn fire together in the late 90s. When she picked up, I could hear the dispatcher's radio crackling faintly in the background. "Sam, everything okay?" "No," I said, "and I think it's about to get worse." I explained the trespassing, the surveying, the septic contamination, the wellness group, and the people photographing my hives. She sighed. "I've gotten 4 calls this week from Meadow Ridge residents complaining about your bees." "They're lying," I said bluntly. "I believe you," she said. "But Karen has influence. These newcomers think she's God's gift to community organizing." I exhaled. What can I do? For now, document everything and wait for Inspector Harris tomorrow. If he verifies contamination, it becomes official, and that gives you leverage. Leverage? I didn't want leverage. I wanted peace. But peace wasn't something Karen allowed. The next morning, Harris arrived right on time. He stepped out of his county truck with a clipboard and a cautious expression. The man looked thorough, mid-40s, neat beard, crisp shirt tucked into his pants. He greeted me respectfully, and we walked to the contaminated area. The moment he knelt down and touched the soil, his eyes widened. "Oh boy," he murmured, "this isn't minor." "No," I said flatly. He took multiple samples, measured depth, snipped sections of grass, photographed everything, including the drainage path that led straight to the Wycombes' home. "Who lives up there?" he asked. "The Wycombes," I said, "HOA president and husband." He raised an eyebrow. "And they didn't notify anyone of a septic problem?" "Uh-huh, I'm telling you, they're claiming I'm the one causing community hazards." He blinked. "The bees?" "The bees." He shook his head, clearly processing the absurdity. "Well, I can already tell you this will escalate quickly. Contamination this size means improper installation. And if it's truly on your land," he paused, "that's a big problem. For them." He left an hour later, promising an official report within a week. As his truck rumbled away, I felt the first glimmer of real hope. But that hope evaporated the next morning when something strange happened. I heard loud voices again, this time more than before. Laughter, conversation, the rustle of dozens of feet moving through the grass. I stepped outside and my stomach dropped. More than 50 people were on my property. 50! They were walking in pairs and clusters, wearing matching shirts with Karen's Wellness Group logo, a stylized tree inside a circle. Karen was at the front, holding a megaphone. And this time she wasn't pretending they were lost. She was leading them deliberately. I stormed toward the closest group. "Get off my land!" A woman turned to me with a pleasant smile. "We're participating in a community exercise event." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is private property." She gestured to Karen. "She said it's shared." Karen spotted me and raised her megaphone. "Sam, good morning. We're just continuing our wellness initiative." I shouted back, "You are trespassing." She ignored me. The group continued moving deeper across my pasture. I felt heat rising in my chest. My throat felt tight. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. Ray arrived minutes later, breathless. "What the hell is she doing?" I said. "She's staging mass trespassing. She's creating evidence of community use." Ray's face whitened. "That's exactly how fraudulent claims succeed. If she documents all this, she can claim your land has been a shared communal space." "Not legally," I said. "Sam," he said quietly, "law matters, but public opinion, that's what she's harnessing." I slammed the laptop shut. "Let her try. I'll bury her with evidence." But as I was driving home, I noticed something that made every muscle in my body tense. 3 SUVs were parked near the entrance of my property, and a dozen people, maybe more, were taking photos of my hives from the road. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and called out, "Can I help you?" A woman stepped forward, her expression polite, but condescending. "We're documenting safety hazards for the community board." "Safety hazards?" I repeated. "Those are registered beehives. They're very close to the public access zone." And I said, "There is no public access." Another man raised his voice. "We already discussed this at the meeting. The area's been shared for years." My patience snapped like a dry twig. "Name one person who walked this land before the Wycombes moved in. Name one." Silence. But the cameras kept clicking. Karen had unleashed an army, and they were doing exactly what she wanted, building artificial evidence of shared use. I got out of the truck and planted myself between them and my property. Not knocking, pounding. It had barely been 20 minutes since sunrise, and the light slipping through my curtains was still soft and gray. My dogs barked from the yard. My heart thudded as I walked across the living room, half expecting to see Curran herself holding a clipboard like the angel of bureaucratic death. But it wasn't her. It was Ray Booker, his face pale, his hands shaking as he held a stack of printed papers thick enough to choke a lawnmower. "We need to talk," he said, stepping past me before I could even invite him in. He spread the papers across my kitchen table. His hands trembled as he arranged them. Emails, maps, property diagrams, financial projections. His glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them back up with a sharp, shaky breath. "Ray," I said, "what is this?" "Proof," he said. "More than proof. This is the whole damn plan." "What plan?" I asked, though inside I already knew the answer. He tapped the top page. "This is what the Wycombes were doing before they got here. This is what they're doing now. And unless we stop them, this is what they'll do to you." I sank into a chair. My hands curled around the edge of the table. Ray took a deep breath. "My son Noah pulled these from an old colleague of his who works in commercial real estate. Turns out Thomas reached out months ago, before they even bought their house, asking for land availability reports in this area." My fingers tightened. "They targeted my land before they moved in?" Ray nodded grimly. "They've been planning for a long time." He pushed the first stack of papers my way. I scanned the top email. The sender's address belonged to Wycombe Strategic Development Group, a subsidiary I'd never heard of, but the corporate-style signature made it look official. The first email was dated 6 months before they moved to Millersford. "The Ork parcel appears to be underutilized agricultural land with no HOA compliance and limited county oversight. Excellent candidate for redevelopment pending acceptable acquisition terms." Underutilized? Limited oversight? Acquisition terms? Pieces began clicking together like tumblers inside a lock. The surveying equipment, the trespassing events, the false claims of public access, the social media push, the blueprint of a community retreat center. Curran didn't want wellness. She wanted ownership. Ray pushed the next page toward me. Financial projections. Millions of dollars in revenue. A layout labeled Data Infrastructure Expansion Initiative. And right beside it, my property. Square footage, capacity projections, utility extension plans. It was all there. My throat tightened. A data center on my land? Ray nodded slowly. Not just a data center, a full-scale server farm. According to these numbers, they projected about 60 megawatts of power usage. That's enormous. Exactly, Ray said. They weren't just going to buy your land, Sam. They were going to level it, clear everything, the oaks, the pasture, the hives, your home. He fell silent, letting the weight of that sink in. I felt hollow, like my stomach had dropped into my boots. My land, destroyed? The place my grandfather built, Linda tended, the soil I grew up turning with my own hands? Gone? Why my land? I whispered. Ray pointed to a map pulled from county infrastructure documents. Because the county's fiber optic line runs just 300 yards from your property line. Your land is flat, accessible, close to a highway, and most importantly, it's privately owned without any HOA restrictions. But it's mine, I said quietly. That's why they needed to break you, Ray said softly. So you'd sell, or so they could claim some kind of right to it. I stared at the papers again, my pulse pounding louder with every page. Internal memos, investor pitches, projected construction cost, return on investment estimates, timeline plans labeled Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and one line that made my breath stop cold. Projected acquisition cost for RO Orc parcel 40 to 60% below market value through strategic pressure and community engagement efforts. Strategic pressure? Community engagement? That meant targeted harassment, manufactured crises, floods of false complaints, mass trespassing disguised as wellness, fake historical claims. I looked up at Ray. He looked at me, with eyes full of alarm. They're not doing this for one development, he said slowly. They're building an empire. My phone buzzed again. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m. at the old hardware store lot, alone. I frowned. Who the hell is MW? Ray leaned over. You should check it. Another text came in instantly. Please, before they stop me, I have information about Thomas. My heart kicked in my chest. Ray's eyes narrowed. MW. Could be someone tied to the HOA? Someone Thomas worked with? I typed a reply. Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone who made a mistake. Someone who doesn't want to be part of this anymore. I swallowed. Ray, I felt cold. My phone buzzed again. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m. at the old hardware store lot, alone. Ray tightened his jaw. It could be a trap. It could be the truth, I said. We stared at each other. The weight of the moment settled around us. Ray said, if you go, you need backup. Not openly, I said. If this person's scared. Ray nodded. I'll follow you and stay out of sight. I exhaled, tension crawling up my spine. Good. Because I wasn't about to walk blindly into whatever the Wycoms were orchestrating. Not with everything I'd seen. Not with what was unfolding. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, checking the hives, stacking wood, cleaning tools, but my mind was on those documents, those emails, the map, the evidence of manipulation. The scale of it all weighed heavily on me. Thomas wasn't a bumbling suburban tech guy. He was a planner, a strategist, a developer who saw land as numbers on a spreadsheet, not as something sacred. And Karen wasn't just an overbearing HOA president, she was the face of their intimidation campaign. That night, the air was cool and thick with the scent of pine. I drove to the old hardware store lot, run-down asphalt, flickering streetlights, weeds growing through the cracks. Ray parked at the far end, turned off his headlights, waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A car slowly rolled into the lot, a small sedan. The driver hesitated, then parked at the far end. The door opened. A woman stepped out, thin, nervous, hood pulled low over her head. She walked toward me, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. Are you Sam? She whispered. Yes. She swallowed hard. My name is Melissa. I used to work for Thomas, at Streamline. MW. Melissa Watkins. She kept looking around like she expected someone to jump out of the shadows. I can't stay long. If Thomas knows I'm here, I'm finished. I nodded. Why are you helping me? She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether to trust me. Then she said something that changed everything. Because what they're doing is illegal. Because they've destroyed families. Because Thomas ruined my cousin's life in Pleasant Hollow. And because you're their biggest target yet. My breath caught. Why me? Because you're the only landowner stubborn enough to resist. And because your land is perfect for what they want. The data center? I said quietly. She shook her head. Not just data. Then what? She hesitated, then stepped closer. Thomas and a group of private investors are building something much bigger. She looked around again and whispered, a high-capacity server hub, a high-value storage facility, an encrypted data relay network tied to several tech companies. I felt cold. Why the trespassing, the harassment? She said, to push you, to make you crack, to create legal pressure until you sell or they can claim use. And Curran? She handles the social side. She controls narratives, builds support, manufactures outrage. And the septic line? She shook her head. That wasn't an accident. The system was installed deliberately across the property line. So if the county blamed someone, it would be you. My jaw tightened. That's criminal. She nodded. Yes, and I have proof. She handed me a flash drive. My pulse hammered. What's on this? Emails, contracts, internal memos, everything. I stared at her. Why help me? She looked away. Because I can't watch them ruin another family, and because you're the first one to fight back. A car engine roared in the distance. Melissa's eyes widened with panic. I have to go. She ran to her car, jumped inside, and sped off into the night. Ray pulled up beside me. Are you okay? He called out of his window. I nodded numbly, holding up the flash drive. We have everything, I said. Ray stared at the small device like it was a bomb. Well, he said quietly, this changes everything. He was right. It did. But not in the way either of us expected, because less than 24 hours later, the Wycombe struck back with a move so brazen and so reckless, it set the entire town on fire, figuratively and almost literally. And by the time the dust settled, 500 strangers would be camping illegally on my property, and the bees would be the least of anyone's problems. By the time the sun rose the next day, I already knew something was wrong. The air had that strange, unsettled stillness it gets right before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was clear. My bees were louder than usual, their voices vibrating through the hives like a warning rumble. And as I stood on my porch, sipping bitter coffee and thinking about everything Melissa had told me, a siren-like feeling rang in my chest. Something was coming. I didn't know how close it was until I walked down my driveway and saw the freshly placed sign staked into the roadside ditch. Millersford Community Retreat. This weekend, all welcome. The sign wasn't just bright, it was huge, the kind you'd use for a county fair or a political rally. At the bottom, in neat printed letters, it said, Location, Meadow Ridge Community Open Lands, behind the Wycombe residence. But the little map next to it, the little hand-drawn route with cheery arrows and dashed lines, ended squarely in the middle of my property. I ripped the sign out of the ground so hard the wooden stake cracked in half. My heart hammered as I marched it back to the house, took a photo of it under good lighting, and sent it to Ray. A second later, my phone buzzed. Ray, I'll be right there. Brace yourself. Brace myself? For what? The answer arrived sooner than I expected. By noon, the rumble of engines rolled across my land like migrating thunder. Dozens of SUVs, hatchbacks, vans, and trucks poured down the Meadow Ridge Development Road. They lined up bumper to bumper, overflowing onto my frontage. Doors opened, people spilled out carrying backpacks, tents, yoga mats, inflatable cushions, folding chairs, coolers, everything you'd need for a festival weekend. And there she was, Alyssa Karan Wycombe, standing proudly in the middle of the chaos, wearing a headset microphone like she was directing a music festival. She waved her arms. Welcome, everyone! Welcome to the first annual Millersford Community Retreat! My jaw dropped. People cheered. Cheered! And then they streamed right past the no trespassing signs, walking straight onto my land. I stormed toward Karan like steam, blasting from a pressure valve. What the hell are you doing? I snapped. She gave me a radiant, rehearsed smile. Sam! Perfect timing! We're setting up right now! On my property, I growled. She feigned surprise. Oh, this again. Sam, we've gone over this. The community has long-standing access rights. There are no access rights, I said, my voice low and dangerous. According to you, she corrected with a sugary tone. According to the original deed. According to the county. According to reality. She ignored me and clapped her hands. Team, please direct the tent installers to Area B. 3 men in matching shirts began unloading giant white tents from the back of a rental truck. A catering truck rolled up behind them, blowing greasy-smelling exhaust into my pasture. 2 teenage boys unloaded speakers the size of refrigerators. A man unhooked a generator and started rolling it onto my grass. I stepped in front of them. Put that down, I snapped. The man shrugged. Lady said this was the spot. It's not, I said. This is my property. Karan rolled her eyes dramatically. Sam, stop embarrassing yourself. This is exactly why we're holding this retreat. To build unity, not hostility. Unity doesn't mean stealing land. Oh, please, she waved a dismissive hand. You're blowing this out of proportion. This is a community event. This is trespassing. She leaned close, her voice dropping to a hiss. You can't stop this. Not now. Not with all these people. I stared at her, stunned by the brazenness. You're insane. She smiled sweetly. I'm organized. And then she turned away like I no longer existed. Within half an hour, my pasture looked like the setup for a commercial outdoor retreat. Tents lined the perimeter, food trucks parked in rows. A massive yoga platform was being constructed just 50 feet from my hives. A speaker tower was being bolted into place. Someone even set up 4 portable toilets so close to my bee yard that I could smell the disinfectant chemicals mixing with honey-scented air. This wasn't just trespassing, this was occupation. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Ruiz picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're seeing this," I said. She sighed heavily. "We've gotten a dozen calls already." "So come stop them!" "Sam, it's tricky. She has a permit." "A permit for my land?" "No," she said. "A general event permit. But we can't shut it down until we verify the location. I'm sending a team now." I hung up, furious but relieved. At least law enforcement was coming. Ray arrived 10 minutes later, jumping out of his truck with his hands up in defeat. "Oh my God. She brought half the county." I said it's a paid event. She's selling tickets. Ray's face darkened. "Then she's not just trespassing. She's profiting off your land." "She's doing more than that," I said. "She's doing it to make the county think this land is communal. She's creating evidence." Ray shook his head. "This is the biggest stunt I've ever seen an HOA president pull." We scanned the scene. More cars arrived, lines formed at the food trucks. Volunteers strung fairy lights through my trees. Karan stood atop a small platform, checking her headset mic, giving orders like a military commander prepping for battle. It was surreal. And then it got worse. I noticed Thomas, at the far end of the pasture, setting up surveying markers again. Only this time, his equipment was bigger. Professional-grade tripods, high-resolution GPS units, and a tablet linked to a mapping program. He was surveying my land again, but this time in front of an entire crowd, creating public proof. I marched toward him. He didn't even look up. "I need you to stop," I said. He kept working. "I said stop." He sighed dramatically and finally turned. "Sam, this is a community event. We're just marking safe zones." "These are property stakes," I said. "You're mapping my land." He shrugged. "Hey, if you're this territorial, maybe you should have joined the HOA board." "You know damn well I'm not in your HOA." "You will be once community guidelines expand," he said calmly. "It's inevitable." My blood boiled. "You're stealing my land." He gave me a cold corporate smile, the kind that said he knew he was untouchable. "Not steal," he corrected. "Reallocate." I took a step toward him. "Reallocate? Say that again, and I'll reallocate that tablet up your—" A loud booming noise interrupted me. Music. Bass-heavy, deep, pounding music. They were testing the speaker array. The deep vibrations rolled across the field, shaking the air, rattling the metal lids on my hives. The bees stirred. I felt the shift immediately. The hum rising from the hives grew sharper, higher, more intense. Bees don't like subwoofer bass. It confuses their direction, scrambles their communication, makes them defensive. I walked toward the sound system crew. "Turn it down!" I shouted over the thump, thump, thump. But before I finished, the music doubled in volume. The vibration hit the hives like a physical blow. Inside them, hundreds of wings fluttered urgently. I ran to the hives, my heart pounding. "Easy, girls, easy!" But the air was tense now, electric with alarm pheromone. Bees sense threats differently than people. They feel it through the ground, through vibration, through movement. The crowd, the shouts, the bass, it all rippled through them. They weren't just disturbed, they were preparing. And then Karan, oblivious as ever, grabbed her microphone. "Welcome, friends! Let's get ready for a day of peace and mindful!" Her employed voice cracked like thunder over the field. At the same time, her technician cranked the speakers up again louder than before, testing the sub-bass. The earth vibrated, the hives shook, the bees boiled out. A cloud of movement burst from the openings, swarming upward in a swirling, shimmering wave of gold and black. I froze. No matter how many years you've kept bees, a swarm is always awe-inspiring and terrifying, especially when there are 500 trespassers standing in its path. The scream started on the far side of the field, a sharp, piercing sound, then another, and another. People dropped their yoga mats, drinks spilled, children cried, adults shouted commands no one obeyed. A food truck operator dove into his vehicle so fast he slammed the door on his own foot. The bees weren't attacking out of aggression, they were defending. The crowd was too loud, too close, too chaotic, and that enormous bass speaker was rattling their home like an earthquake. I ran to the hives and ripped, "Easy, girls, easy." But the air was tense now, electric with alarm pheromone. Bees sense threats differently than people. They feel it through the ground, through vibration, through movement. The crowd, the shouts, the bass, it all rippled through them. They weren't just disturbed, they were preparing. And then Corinne, oblivious as ever, grabbed her microphone. "Welcome, friends! Let's get ready for a day of peace and mindful." At that same moment, the day after the bee incident, my land looked like the aftermath of a storm. Folding chairs toppled, fairy lights hung from branches like abandoned cobwebs. Hundreds of footprints carved erratic paths through the soil. Half-collapsed tents lay like wounded animals, flapping in the wind. Trash bags, water bottles, energy bar wrappers, and spilled smoothie cups littered my field. A yoga mat dangled from a tree branch, like someone had tried to escape by climbing. And in the center of it all, the bees hummed, a pulsing, steady rhythm that felt almost meditative after the chaos of the day before. I walked slowly through the pasture, my boots crunching over crushed grass. The morning sun was low, a soft gold brushing over the world. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Kieran had been taken away in a sheriff's cruiser. Thomas had been questioned on site until nearly dark. Deputies had collected witness statements, while EMTs treated everyone who'd been unlucky enough to provoke a bee. But even as the ambulances pulled out and the cruisers rolled down the driveway, I knew this wasn't over. People like the Wycombes didn't just disappear. Their actions left footprints, some obvious, some buried, and I had a sinking feeling the real damage was still hidden under the surface. At around 9 a.m., I saw Ray's truck bumping along my driveway. He parked beside my old oak tree and stepped out with a look that told me this morning was not going to be peaceful. "Sam," he said, "brace yourself." "For what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the road. A black SUV turned into my driveway, followed by two sedans. They weren't local vehicles, that much I could tell. The SUVs had government plates. "What the?" I muttered. The first SUV rolled to a stop, and a woman stepped out. Tall, dark hair tied back, wearing a blazer over crisp slacks. She had a badge clipped to her belt. "Mr. Rourke?" she called. "Yes?" "I'm Special Agent Hartman with the California Attorney General's office." Behind her, two more people exited, one holding a large binder, another with a camera bag. Another sedan parked, and a man in a county health department vest stepped out. A moment later, yet another vehicle arrived, a Channel 7 news van. My jaw dropped. What is happening?" I asked. Agent Hartman approached calmly, flipping open her badge. "Mr. Rourke, we received documents last night. Documents alleging fraud, environmental violations, financial manipulation, and conspiracy tied to Thomas and Alyssa Wycombe." My mind flashed back to the flash drive Melissa had given me. "You mean the files?" she said. "Yes, those files." "And you're here because—" She glanced across my field, taking in the abandoned tents and trampled grass. "To investigate what appears to be a major real estate fraud operation disguised as community activism." I blinked. "Fraud? As in criminal?" "Criminal," she confirmed, "and extensive." The county health official stepped forward. "We are here about the septic contamination you reported. Inspector Harris filed his early findings, and the evidence looks serious." A man with a tripod approached. "Channel 7 News, Mr. Rourke. We'd like to record a statement once the officials finish speaking with you." It was surreal. A day ago, I'd been fighting trespassers with nothing but a camera and a rake. Now the Attorney General's office, the county health department, and the local news were standing in my yard like I was the main event in a crime documentary. Ray whistled softly. "Looks like the cavalry showed up after all." Agent Hartman turned to me. "Mr. Rourke, we need to ask you questions regarding your experience with the Wycombes. Everything you witnessed, everything you recorded." I nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." The next 3 hours were a whirlwind. We sat at my kitchen table, Agent Hartman, two assistants, and me, while Ray made coffee and offered donuts he'd brought from the bakery. I showed them the photos of trespassing, the trail cam footage, the septic contamination, the surveying notes, screenshots of Kieran's posts, and the sign advertising her illegal retreat. When I handed over the flash drive, the room shifted. They all leaned forward. Agent Hartman connected it to her laptop and opened the first folder. Internal memos, investor packets, blueprint layouts, email chains. One message in particular made her eyebrows lift. After acquisition, the previous landowner will be persuaded to relocate. Non-compliance will be managed via regulatory pressure and community-driven campaigns to ensure alignment with development goals. Another document, labeled Phase 3, outlined plans for clearing several acres and repurposing agricultural land for the Wycombe Nexus facility. Then the big one, the blueprint marked Confidential. A cluster of industrial buildings sat exactly where my pasture was. Fiber lines extended directly across my property. Projected revenue, millions per year. And under Obstacles, it listed Local Resistance, Non-HOA Parcel, Owner Unwilling to Negotiate. Agent Hartman took a deep breath. This is worse than we thought. How bad? I asked. She turned her laptop toward me. Bad enough that the FBI will likely be joining the case. These documents indicate multi-state fraud, misuse of HOA authority, bribery of officials, forged legal documents, and an organized effort to acquire land through coercive tactics. My head spun. Multi-state? I echoed. Yes, Hartman said. Pleasant Hollow, Greencrest, Sunrise Valley, all targeted the same way. Karen and Thomas were key players in every one. I swallowed hard. She tapped another document. This one shows a list of upcoming targets. She pointed to a highlighted parcel. Your land was the next acquisition. I stared at the screen. All of this for a server farm? Hartman said. Not just a server farm, she said. A secured data transfer hub. High value, high profit, and very attractive to investors looking to build infrastructure quietly. I laughed once, humorless. Quietly is not how it went. No, she agreed, because you pushed back. Anyone would, I muttered. Hartman shook her head. No, most didn't. The county health inspector walked in from outside. Mr. Rourke. Yes? He held a clipboard thick with notes. I've completed my preliminary review of the septic contamination. It's extensive. The Wycombe's drain field was illegally installed across your boundary and has been leaking for at least a year, possibly more. I exhaled slowly. He continued. The county will be issuing fines, large ones, and because the contamination affected your land, you may be eligible for civil damages. Eligible? I smirked. They're paying. He nodded. Trust me, after today, they will. A knock sounded on my open door. Mr. Rourke? Tessa Hill, Channel 7. Are you ready for your interview? Agent Hartman nodded at me. Go on. Your voice will help other victims come forward. I stepped outside into sunlight and cameras. Tessa Hill stood with a microphone, her cameraman adjusting focus. She greeted me with professional warmth. Mr. Rourke, viewers have been closely following yesterday's incident at your property involving the unauthorized community retreat. But today, officials discovered something far larger. What can you tell us? I took a slow breath. Everything you've seen is part of a calculated scheme by the Wycombes to seize my land. She lifted an eyebrow. Seize? I said firmly, yes. They disguised intimidation tactics as community events, manipulated public perception, falsified access claims, and hosted a commercial gathering on land they don't own. And they did this while running a septic system illegally onto my property and surveying without permission. And the bees? She asked gently. I shook my head. My bees reacted to the vibration from the sound system. They defended their hives. They weren't weapons. They were living creatures reacting to a threat. She nodded. And the documents discovered? I hesitated, then said, they prove that the Wycombes weren't just bad neighbors, they were criminals. That interview aired that night, and within 24 hours, everything exploded. The Attorney General held a press conference announcing an investigation into the Wycombes' fraudulent real estate activities. 3 more victims from Pleasant Hollow came forward, each telling eerily familiar stories: HOA pressure, false complaints, illegal surveying, public harassment disguised as community involvement. 2 former employees of the Wycombes company contacted the AG's office after recognizing their names in the broadcast. Melissa, who had risked everything to give me that flash drive, submitted a sworn statement. And 3 days later, Thomas and Karen Wycombe were arrested. The charges against them stacked higher than I'd imagined. Conspiracy to commit land fraud, bribery of a county official, forgery of legal documents, environmental violations, unauthorized commercial activity,